was a fascinating man. So, without further ado, the main man for tonight is Prof Ken Patterson. So, Prof Patterson was a diabetes and endocrinology doctor in the Royal Infirmary. He retired in 2017. And he, as a trainee, many moons ago, worked with a gentleman who was closely affiliated with Erskine Hospital. And so Ken developed a bit of an interest in Erskine Hospital and William Macewen. And so tonight he's going to open our exhibition officially with a talk about Sir William Macewen and the Princess Louise Scottish Hospital for limbless sailors and soldiers.
Right, good evening, ladies and gentlemen, or is it afternoon? I can't really quite decide. I think it's getting dark. I'll say it's evening. Thank you for this up already. Thanks for that introduction, Kate, and it's lovely to see so many of you here tonight. You've heard a little bit about me. I've spent 36 years of my working life in this building, or pretty much. I managed to escape to Southern General as it then was for a year. But apart from that, most of my working life was here, as John Stewart can testify. And it's a great pleasure therefore to be back and have the opportunity to combine two things, if you like, as Kate's already said, my interest in or knowledge of Erskine Hospital, but also my knowledge of Royal Infirmary and Sir William Macewen and his contributions here and wider contributions. This is not going to be a detailed talk about Sir William Macewen, nor is it going to be a detailed talk about Erskine Hospital. If you can imagine a Venn diagram where the two circles overlap, it's a very small talk about the bit in the middle where Sir William Macewen overlaps with Erskine Hospital. Although, as I hope to suggest to you, his contribution perhaps was not as small as I've just implied. So this is the man himself. You've seen the picture because it's outside, that's a very standard picture and so on. This is him, I think, relatively late in life, shall we say, around about the time that we're talking about here, because he was actually 67 when the Erskine Hospital came into being. And he looks a quite ferocious person, and I think, and you'll see some comments outside, I think he was a slightly ferocious person. We'll see a comment later on that would certainly hint that he perhaps wasn't the greatest team player, shall we say. I think he was anything but a team player. I think he was quite keen to get his own way, and thankfully probably did get his own way to the benefit of a large number of people. This is his background first of all. He was born in 1848 in Port Bannatyne on the Isle of Bute. He graduated in medicine in 1869 in Glasgow, became a full surgeon, that's the equivalent of a consultant surgeon, here at the Royal Infirmary in 1877. 1883 became a surgeon to the Royal Hospital for Sick Kids, and then in 1892 became the Regis Professor of Surgery, and at that point, in the only downward step in his career, he moved to the Western Infirmary. But he seemed to recover from that. It was okay. He eventually retired back to Garrity in Bute, and died in 1924 and is buried on the island of Bute. And we'll see some of that in just a moment or two. What are his highlights in terms of medicine? I mean, Kate's already said just a number of different things he did. Surgery for rickets was one of his big interests, because of course rickets at that time was rife in Glasgow, particularly rife in East End of Glasgow, where the sun never shone, big tall tenements and so on. And he developed an operation, Macewen's osteotomy, and an instrument, which we'll see in a minute or two, Macewen's osteotome, for performing this procedure. He developed an operation for inguinal hernia. Now, nobody would do that operation nowadays, but at the time it was a new approach to treating hernias. He did Macewen's pneumonectomy, removal of a lung, which was a fairly major operation, to put it very mildly, still is for that matter, but he developed a different way of doing it, and which was widely taken up. He performed the first neurosurgery in Scotland, removal of a meningioma from a young female patient, and that was actually undertaken here in the Royal Infirmary. And this, of course, predates any kind of brain scans or anything like that. He worked out where the meningioma was on the basis of the physical signs that she had, and went in and took it out. And she lived for many, many years after that and died of something completely different. So it was a success. He also produced an atlas of head and neck sections, and you'll see as an example of it, I saw earlier on, I think it's up the back of the website. So that was one of his interests, and this was actually something he was interested in, was combining photography and teaching. This was a new, photography was obviously not completely new, but relatively new at this stage, and combining photography with teaching materials was relatively new. He was very keen on, he did paediatric surgery as well, particularly cleft lip and palate surgery, for which he's not really remembered, but in fact, this transformed the lives of these kids with cleft lip and so on. He was keen on endotracheal intubation for anaesthesia, and I was getting a tube down your throat so you could be ventilated, but that wasn't standard practice. Most patients at that time were anaesthetised with chloroform or ether and just had to breathe by themselves, if you like. And as I say, extensive use of photographs to record and teach was one of his other fortes, if you like. So a huge range, no surgeon, patchy in there, no surgeon would consider doing all these operations. You know, I mean, any other problem, but the idea that you would attempt all of these things, not if you attempted these things, you'd probably get struck off because you would be regarded you're trying to do far too many things. Would you not specialise in something, Doctor? And this is some of the qualifications and recognition he got. He was all over the place, honorary FRCSs in England and Ireland, fellow of the Royal Society, surgeon to the King. And he was everywhere. You couldn't turn your back without William Macewen being somewhere around what you were doing. And that wasn't just true in the UK. He was an honorary member of the Imperial Academy of Military Science in St. Petersburg, the German Surgical Society, Hungarian Medical Society, American Medical Society, Royal Medical Academy of Rome, and a corresponding member of the Surgical Society of Paris. Now, nowadays you can do all that on the internet, and a few emails and so on and so forth, but to get yourself as widely known as that by 1910 was quite a feat, if you like. You had to do a lot of travelling around, and I suspect he was a corresponding member because he wrote to them, if you like, rather than because he sent them the odd email or something like that. So clearly, a man of huge network and influence and so on, as well as considerable surgical skills. This is Garrackley, where he was born. This is on the island of Bute, and there's a little plaque there that says this house is the birthplace of Sir William Macewen, and placed here in valuable services rendered by him to humanity. So it's nice that he is recognised in his birthplace. This is a Macewen's osteotome. Now basically, let's be frank about it, it's a chisel. But, I mean, I've got something very similar to that in the toolbox, but it's not just any old chisel. I don't know. First of all, it's made of highly tempered steel, which means that it's very, it retains a sharp edge, because bone is quite tough stuff actually. So to get through it, because what you have to do to correct the rickets is basically break the leg and straighten it, put it back together again. So it's made of highly tempered steel, which retains a sharp edge whenever you can cut through the bone and so on. The other thing was that surgeons were using chisels for other things at that time, but they nearly all had wooden handles. And the problem with that was, first of all, where the blade attached to the wooden handle was a kind of weak point, but secondly, it was very hard to sterilise the wooden handle. You couldn't actually get all the bugs out of it. So what he designed was this one-piece design, which was relatively straightforward to sterilise. You could boil it for hours if you wanted, and nothing would happen to it. And so it was, in fact, although it doesn't look like much, it was a significant step forward in terms of a surgical development. And here's an actual picture of one of his patients before. And that was the kind of thing that you were looking at. This is incredibly disabling. You'll think of rickets as just a wee slightly bandy legs or something like that. But it was way, way more than that. And so what you have to do is basically break the legs, straighten them, and allow them to knit together again, and so on. So major quality of life implications for the patient. This is probably the same section you'll see up there. This is an example of one of these photographs of a brain, and then this diagram here represents a photograph that is all annotated with all different structures and so on. Now, my knowledge of neuroanatomy is way, way less than any of that. Quite how he developed the knowledge of neuroanatomy is a bit of a mystery to me, but he certainly did, and produced a number of books on exactly that theme and so on, which were widely used. This is his burial place in Bute, again with the rest of the family. If we just go forward there, it is a loving memory of Sir William Macewen of Garrackley and some other members of the family and so on, which is appropriate. And if you look out, you see over there to the coast and the Clyde and the mainland and so on and so forth. So he's buried in an appropriate place, I think, somewhere that meant a lot to him. And as we'll see, meant a lot to others as well. So, World War I. War was declared by Britain on the 4th of August 1914, and it's alleged that the vox pop was it'll all be over by Christmas. I think the evidence that people thought that's pretty scanty, but it's always quoted that people thought this would be a kind of short, sharp shock. It wasn't, of course. Costly battles at Marne in 14 and Ypres in 1915 led to multiple casualties. And because of the trench warfare that they were fighting, many of these casualties had major amputations, particularly leg amputations. And so by mid-1915, there were over 2,000 amputees waiting for limb fitting and training at Roehampton in England, which is still an orthotics hospital. But this was the only place in the UK that was able to provide artificial limbs. And so there was disquiet in Scotland about the lack of Scottish provision. They always disquiet about something in Scotland, but because, well, that was particularly relevant because a large number of regiments that were fighting in the war were Scottish regiments. So Scotland was, if you like, disproportionately affected, if you like. So a preliminary meeting was held on the 24th of November 1915 to consider providing an auxiliary hospital in Scotland for the management of these amputees. The meeting was held at Sir William Macewen's house, 3 Woodside Crescent in Glasgow, just up near Park Circus. And the meeting was clearly led, I've got the copy of the minutes in my bag there, clearly led by Sir William. It was obviously his meeting, if you like. And the Lord Provost was there, Lady Bute was there, so, but it was very clearly Sir William Macewen's meeting. And they came up with a list of things to do. To-do list: suitable building to be identified. That seems pretty innocuous. Limb-making industry to be established. There was at this time no manufacture of artificial limbs worth speaking of in Scotland. Surgical intervention would be required. Training would be required. And Sir William was very keen on workshops for curative and vocational purposes, and this is a quote, to learn an occupation suitable to their altered circumstances, now they're being an amputee, instead of being allowed to drift into doing nothing or playing cards all the day. I mean, it's not very subtle, but what he was basically saying was these people can no longer do the things they could do with the 2 legs, but they have to find an occupation that they can do, even though they're an amputee. So a public meeting was duly held. I'm grateful to the Princess Louise Hospital who provided me with the images of these minute books, which they have all nicely bound. A public meeting was duly held on the 29th of March 1916, chaired by the Lord Provost, and basically an agreement was made to proceed with a plan. And what's interesting is, if I turn over the page, they established a committee structure. And I'm not going to tell you what all the committees are, that doesn't matter. What I'm going to do is highlight one of the names. And that name, it won't surprise you, is Sir William Macewen. He basically put himself on every single committee that ran the hospital. So the idea that he might have had some influence upon it is just too bizarre for words. I mean, he was actually, again, all over it like a rash. So you're already getting a sense that this is somebody who, ever so slightly controlling, but no. A controlling surgeon? No. So various places were looked at. Let me careful what I say here with one of them. Various places were looked at. They looked at Belhouston Park in Glasgow. They looked at Ballochmyle down in Mauchline, Ayrshire kind of way, and so on and so forth. And eventually they settled on Erskine House. And this is Erskine House in 1915. Erskine House had been built in the late 1850s for Lord Blantyre, but it passed into the hands of one Thomson Aiken, ship and produce broker and commission merchant in Glasgow. And they approached Thomson Aiken, who said that they could use Erskine House free of charge till the end of the war and then for 12 months after that. Now you think, that's pretty generous offer, actually, in all honesty. So that was the deal, but there was a further bit of deal. And that's here. I shall read it off a bit of paper here because you'll not be able to read it. Mr. Guy reminded the meeting that the hospital had acquired an option to purchase at any time before the expiry of 1 year after the declaration of peace, to purchase the house and an area of ground, 296 acres of ground, at the agricultural value of the land. In other words, they were only paying for the land, they were getting Erskine House free, chucked in, that they could buy any time within the next, till the war ended and then a year after that. And he stated that one who desires to remain anonymous was strongly of the opinion that in the interest of the hospital, the house and grounds should be acquired now. So some other benefactor, and wishes to remain anonymous, is actually agreeing to provide the funds to allow them to buy the land and with the land the house. And the committee, the committee unanimously agreed to accept the gift, and Sir William Macewen moved a hearty vote of thanks to the anonymous donor for his princely munificence, which it was, I think. Well, the anonymous donor turned out to be Sir John Reed. Sir John Reed was also from Bute, strangely enough. You think Bute's tiny, but where all these people are coming from, I don't know. I didn't think anybody come from Bute. Now I practically know a lot. He trained initially at the Railway Engineering Works, what are now basically at St Rollocks, if you like, just up the road there. His father was a director of a locomotive manufacturing company, Nielsen Reed and Company, and eventually it merged with other companies and they became the North British Locomotive Works. And they had various works, including the one up the road there at Springburn, but also elsewhere in England. And it was he, obviously as a director, who wasn't short of a shilling or two, and agreed to fund the purchase of the Erskine House and Erskine grounds for the hospital. So, they then decide that they need to have a patron. And Sir William Macewen is acquainted with Princess Louise. Princess Louise, on the outside his left here, was the 6th child and 4th daughter of Queen Victoria. And she was also born in 1848, the same year as Sir William Macewen, so they had already something in common. She was a sculptor and a bit of a feminist, apparently. And she married the Marquis of John Marquis of Lawn in 1871. He was the son, obviously, of the Duke and Duchess of Argyll, because the Marquis of Lawn is their son. After a few years of marriage, in 1878, he was posted to Canada as Governor General of Canada. And Louise absolutely loathed it because she was used to refined, arty-farty kind of culture in London, of sculptors and so on and so forth. And Canada was basically, as she said, trees and lumberjacks. And so she absolutely loathed it. Now, in fairness, they named Lake Louise in British Columbia, for instance, is named after her and so on. So I think the Canadians took to her all right, but she absolutely hated it. They had no family. He was almost certainly gay, and they kind of drifted apart. And sadly, really, she eventually returned to England. But in 1911, they were kind of reconciled and decided that, okay, settle down together. Whereupon in 1914, he proceeded to die, which is just ever so slightly unfortunate for him. So in 1915, this is Princess Louise in full mourning regalia, if I can put it that way. But anyway, it was decided that Princess Louise should be the patron of the hospital, the auxiliary hospital in Scotland. But hence, as we know, that's exactly what happened. So Princess Louise becomes patron. Dear Sir William, I received the Lord Provost's letter the same day as yours, and hasten to let you know that I've answered him that I shall be most pleased to become patron of such a splendid undertaking. It's a first-rate idea to start making artificial limbs in Scotland, as I know well the pressure of work there is at Roehampton. That American, I don't know who this is, that brought over so many inventions on that point is a wonderful man, and you should see him. It would indeed be splendid if the men could be induced to meet this industry, as it would be a most considerable one for them. So that was written on the 22nd of March 1916, but it wasn't sent on the 22nd of March, because on the next day, she writes another letter, and she says, I kept back this letter. This is her handwriting on the actual typescript. I kept back this letter so as to add, I thought it wiser to tell His Majesty the King that the Lord Provost had requested me to take an interest in the movement. And he, the King, seems very anxious that nothing should be done which would in any way cause a competition with Roehampton, as this is what he says is greatly feared, and it seems that they already know that such a Scotch hospital is being contemplated. I have been trying to explain that I did not see the necessity of rivalry, the object being merely to take off some pressure and give quicker attendance. Could we not, in some way, it must be carefully thought out, state that this is no way the case when it's announced that such an undertaking is in progress of fruition in Scotland? It seems the King had been approached with the hope expressed that such a Scotch institution would not be started, which would in any way hinder the success of Roehampton Institution, which is the originator. I did say I was going to urge the committee to be in communication with the Americans at Roehampton, who are clearly the only really successful men and cannot be spared from there. Felicia Maya, yours sincerely, Louise. Kindly tell Lady Butte what I have said. I am, as you can fancy, most anxious for a success, but it would be such a pity to cause any rivalry, and therefore we must go carefully to work. So she's actually taking her responsibilities page quite seriously. She realises that she can be the oil, if you like, that could cause this to happen. Interestingly, of course, the king is actually her nephew at the time, King George V. So it's a slightly odd dynamic situation that she's having to go to him and kind of try and beg for him to support the cause. But anyway, he does. She goes and does this, and it's agreed that the things should go ahead. So we then look at the minute book of all the meetings that are held to discuss this, and you look at the roles for Sir William. A royal charter would be required, right? That's your man. War Office Committee on Artificial Limbs, yep, that's that. Appointment of registrar and senior surgical student, that seems fair, doesn't it? Accommodation for the limb workshop, we had to find accommodation on the Erskine House site. Medical examination of staff, a slightly odd for a surgeon for that, anyway. Was an offer of a Dr. Maguire of Bishopton, a GP, to be a visiting physician. As you can imagine, that was turned down. Other things Sir William was referred to deal with: window ventilation, workshop and equipment, naming of wards, car timetable, petrol permits, books necessary, and appointments of the house steward, superintendent of works, and linen maid. So he's certainly keeping a finger in many pies, shall we say. And just for additions, supply of overcoats for patients, visiting times. Lord Provost said on as broad and generous lines as possible. I think Sir William probably regarded visiting as an unnecessary evil, but anyway. Refreshment room for visitors, and my favourite, the subcommittee on fetes, etc. All of these were things that were remitted for him to deal with. So the bottom line is that he had wanted to deal with them, he didn't have to deal with them, but I think he quite wanted to deal with them, to be perfectly honest. There was talk of when they would open the hospital. Oh, no, sorry. It was suggested to him that he would seek the cooperation of fellow surgeons. And he said, I'll take this role on one condition, that you don't ask other surgeons to cooperate. I am not a cooperator. I wonder, revalidation in 2023, you're assessed in your teamwork skills and things like that. I think he might have struggled to stay on the medical register between you and me, but maybe don't quote me on that. So, Princess Louise writes on the 4th of October 1916, I'm completely run down and suffering from exhaustion of the nervous system. Thus the doctor became imperative, and that is the reason why you have not heard from me. I've been fretting about Erskine, and I'm sorry to hear from you that you have had such drawbacks in getting the various work there carried out, but trust the workmen are more satisfactory now. So she's taking an interest in it, she's heard that things are not going that well, but she herself is still in this sort of depths of despair following her bereavement, and has been warned against travelling as far away as Erskine is. So, Sir William writes back the following day to her Royal Highness, Madam, thank you for your letter of the 4th just received. I'm sorry that you're not so fit as to enable you to come north at present, but hope you will feel soon quite restored. Meantime, we will have arranged not to have the formal opening until the place is in working order. That will be the version given to the public. In other words, we will cover up for the fact that you're not able to come by saying we're holding off the opening until we've actually got patients and so on. So he's a wee bit of an Alistair Campbell here, isn't kind of spinning on what we've done with Cummings. He's definitely spinning the opening here, but so it does show you at least have some people's skills, shall we say. Spontaneous donations. Now you've got to remember, this is in the middle of the First World War, right? So they got £100,000 in both 1915 and 1960. To put that in context, that's equivalent to about £8.8 million in 2023, so it's a huge sum of money. And then they were given like a piano, a harmonium, bath chairs, 2 motor cars, a Sunbeam, a Studebaker American car, more jam than you could shake a stick at, I think, a bagatelle board, a gong, presumably for announcing the arrival of food or something like that, and perhaps most interesting, the ferry inn. Some of you of a certain age like me will remember there used to be a ferry across the Clyde Erskine, and on the south side of the ferry there was the ferry inn, which is where you spent your time waiting on the ferry coming, obviously. So, and the ferry inn was duly gifted to Erskine Hospital, and for whatever they wanted to use it for, they went ahead and used it as actually a place for the visitors and patients to socialise and so on. It became a kind of glorified game, if you like, or something like that. 10th of October 1916, first admissions, and this is the actual admission book, names of the patients, addresses, nature of their injury and so on, all recorded by hand. And the Erskine Hospital has all the admission books for everybody. You'll notice that the name is slightly different. Princess Louise Scottish Hospital for maimed and limbless sailors and soldiers. I'm delighted to say that the maimed was dropped fairly early on, and it just became for limbless soldiers and so on and so on. But I say all these admissions are all carefully recorded and all bound and so on, and you can actually go and peruse them. I don't know why you would, but nonetheless, it certainly was. And this was the Erskine Hospital ward. As you can see, it's a big, what do you think has been a kind of big long dining room or a socialising area in this big private house. And as you see, the beds are just, like a Nightingale ward, but there's no screens or anything like that. It's fairly basic, although interesting, it does have nice light windows and things like that. It's not an unpleasant place to be, if you like. And if we look at the next picture, this was the kind of day room, which had a somewhat ornate ceiling. You might wish to commit the ceiling to memory, but as you see, there's square chairs and a snooker table, whatever. And this was the kind of day room area where they would circulate. Yes, I said remember the ceiling didn't have surgery. Most amputations were done close to the front line. And most of them were done by very inexperienced surgeons in inverted commas. Many of them were not trained in surgery in any meaningful way at all. They were not far from being just senior medical students or something like that. And there was a frequent need to revise the amputation stump in order to make it suitable for an artificial leg to be fitted. Most people left the stump for 4 to 6 months to kind of settle down and see what it turned out like or something like that. As you would expect, Macewen favoured early surgical intervention. The stump wasn't right when you arrived, you had an operation, and it was made the way he wanted it to be. And that was his modus operandi. He undertook most of the interventions personally. So he did the actual surgery himself. He had an operating theatre situated right beside the Clyde with 7 large windows overlooking the river. So if the actual operating got a bit tedious at any time, you could always look out the window and see what's happening. And the river was quite busy because of the ward, like ships going up and down. So there was plenty of entertainment if you were looking for it. I think if I was on the operating table, I might prefer a bit of concentration on the job in hand rather than shipbuilding or ship watching. But anyway, as I say, he undertook most of the operations himself in this operating theatre. There was little previous experience of prosthetic limb making in Scotland, and Macewen said it's possible to create a local industry instead of taking them from alien limb makers, which he means foreign limb makers, not actual ET or anything like that. Naturally, of course, who would design the limb? Yep, you got it. Limbs were designed by Macewen, and willow was the wood of choice for exactly the same reason as the wood of choice for cricket bats and things like that. It's very light and it's very strong, and therefore it was ideal for making artificial limbs. And the manufacture was initially by shipyard carpenters and cabinet makers. They normally fitted out liners, ocean-going liners and things like that. But of course, they weren't building ocean-going liners in the middle of the First World War. So they were a wee bit of a loose end, if you like. So he approached initially Yarrows and Arles, the shipbuilders on the Clyde, and got their carpenters and cabinet makers to start up making artificial limbs. But they also taught some of the amputees how to make artificial limbs, and eventually the artificial limb making was taken totally in-house, and they did it all themselves. So this is the initial prosthesis fitting. They were very, very simple. They were, in all it was a peg leg. They were a kind of basket ear into which the stump fits, and then just a straightforward peg like that. Subtle? No. Effective? Very. They developed some various other designs. We'll see one later that's got kind of a hinging knee and so on and so forth. These were very light, and therefore the guys could move about really quickly on them. And actually, they were probably the preferred construction. They were simple, they didn't have anything to go wrong, and because, as I say, they were so light, you could run about on them. So we come to a kind of apocryphal maybe story, the vanishing willows. It said that at Glasgow University, which is what that is, on the side slope there, that's facing what used to be the West End Infirmary, there were a number of willow trees, and a couple of particularly moth-eaten looking willow trees. And Macewen approached the principal of the university, Sir Donald McAllister, and said, could I possibly have these willow trees for the manufacture of artificial legs at Erskine Hospital? And Sir Donald said, I have no objections, and I'm sure that the university court will give them to you if you ask them. And Macewen replied, if you're sure they'll give permission, I'll ask them later. And the story is that by the end of the afternoon, the willows were gone. So this has given rise to is it a proper story? I can find no, Glasgow University can't find any, well, that's not true. Glasgow University can find no record of ever being asked. It was never discussed at the court papers, which it was ever discussed, but they may just have been taken away, you know. But anyway, knowing Macewen, I wouldn't put it past him. I mean, that's what I always say. Soldiers are like children and require looking after more than usual patients, said Princess Louise. I don't know which would necessarily want to be quoted on that, but what she's saying is true, and that is that soldiers, these are particularly young soldiers, many of them are in their teens still, and they had lived a life of being told what to do. You know, as a soldier, those days, jumped, and how high, and so on and so forth, and therefore, they really were barely capable of an independent existence. They actually need to be told, right, get up, do that, do this, do that, and so on and so on. So to some extent, I understand what she's saying, but perhaps not her finest choice of words, if I may put it that way. Workshops and training. It was resolved to consider an item placed on the agenda at the request of Sir William Macewen as to the desirability of affording employment. Sir William Macewen said the question was put on the agenda not because he had any doubt on the subject, but because the expediency of the matter had been raised by the Training for Employment Committee. And somebody had said it was an organisation called the Soldiers and Sailors Help Society that had been founded in the Boer War, and its role was to provide training and occupational, support for ex-servicemen, and they ran workshops and so on. And so Sir William asked a simple question: how many workshops have they held in Scotland? And the answer was none. At which point he said, well, that's the answer there. They're not going to do it. We need to do it. We need to take it in-house to give these people careers that they can go back to. And so they did various things. Hairdressing was something you could do. You didn't have to run around all that much to do hairdressing and so on. And so they brought in professional hairdressers to teach the patients, if you like, hairdressing. Basket making. Most baskets at that point in the early 1900s were imported from countries like Germany and Austria, so where basket making was quite a thing. And of course, all of a sudden we couldn't import baskets from these countries since we were busy shooting at them. So making baskets locally became a useful exercise, and again, something that you do largely seated or just standing at a bench or something like that. Tailoring. Initially they started off making military uniforms, but then they realised that, well, you can make a military uniform, you can make anything else as well. And there was a need, a lot of skilled workmen were away on the battlegrounds in fighting the war. And so therefore there was a lack of people with the skills. If these people could be trained up, then there would be jobs for them. And sadly some of the already trained tailors weren't really coming back. And so tailoring was quite a big thing. Again, shoemaking was exactly the same thing. Some of you, none of you are really old enough to remember, but there used to be a shoe shop in Gordon Street in Glasgow called James Allen and Sons. I remember it, so it's in the lifetime of living people. But anyway, James Allen provided craftsmen to come down and train up the amputees in shoemaking. Other things, commercial things, they're doing bookkeeping and shorthand and so on and that one there. Carpentry. In fact, carpentry was the longest surviving of these industries. Carpentry continued at Erskine until 2002 because there was always a need to have furniture and so on that it needed. An early audit of practice. This is 1916, those only so old. I'm directed to inform the War Office which to consider the making of limbs. For this purpose, to audit them, it's proposed to select from Roehampton 12 people with somewhat similar amputations and send 6 to Bray and 6 to Erskine House, Glasgow, and have them fitted. And then we'll have a look at them and judge them. And it says there, which the opinion was generally expressed that in order to accomplish this end, it was quite unnecessary to send men from Roehampton. They could just send some of the Erskine patients to London if they wanted to see them. And but they were quite happy for that. But the idea that they were going to be sent patients as kind of guinea pigs, if you like, didn't appeal. And I think that what actually happened was that some of the Erskine patients did go to London and a box was ticked somewhere or other. The chairman proposed that Sir William Macewen should have a definite and distinctive title given to him in connection with the hospital. Sir William said that this was unnecessary. It was ultimately remitted to the chairman of Lady Ailsa and Professor Farr to consider the matter. No title was ever conferred upon him. That wasn't his style, if you like. But I didn't mean to say that he didn't have quite a bit to do with it, shall we say. Here's the invitation to the opening ceremony. This was eventually held on the 6th of June 1917, so about 8 months after the hospital opened or something. So by that time it had been really churning through the patients. The picture on the other side is quite interesting. This is Erskine House here, and these were 2 auxiliary wards that were to be built. Now, in fact, they never were built, because by the middle of 1918, the war was coming to the end, if you like, and so the number of new casualties was in sharp decline, mercifully. And so, in fact, only Erskine House itself ever actually accommodated patients. The auxiliary wards were never built, but one of the reasons for choosing Erskine House was that it had the land round about it that could have been used had they required to be. Very early on, what's this dated? 1918, yeah. They started publishing their work. Now you think it's the middle of the war, but it was of course the end of the war, okay. But to have time to actually publish what you're doing, as well as chopping people's legs off and fitting them in artificial limbs and so on, just it's an indication of, again, I'm pretty sure Macewen was the driver behind this, getting his work known, getting the work of the hospital recognised further and wider. This was one of the very early designs, the one I showed you earlier on, simple basket construction with a peg, and the baskets came in various sizes so that you could alter them for the height of the patient and also for the girth, if you like, of the amputated stump, which was important. And as I say, they were fitted, and this is the one with the bendy knee, if you like. And some of them had artificial looking feet put on them so that you could put shoes on them and so on and so forth. So they were trying to refine them just a little, but the basics stayed pretty similar, let's be frank about it. Erskine House workshops, they published on their training activities and so on and so forth. It was a form, I guess it's kind of early occupational therapy, isn't it? It's kind of trying to teach people and so on, but they actually again were publishing on that well ahead of anybody else. They were actually trying to rehabilitate people, not just get their legs sorted out, but get them back into the workplace and back into activities of daily living and so on. So some treatment stats. To the end of 1918, they had treated 3,450 patients, of whom just under 2,700 had been fitted with prosthetic limbs. They did have occasional patients with arm amputations and things like that. And to the end of 1919, they had treated 5,500 patients, 5,250 had new prosthetic limbs, and others had revised and replacement prostheses and so on. They did eventually wear out. The average length of stay in year 1 was 28 days. So you arrived with your amputation, you maybe had an operation to fix up the stump, and you were home in 28 days. Now, that's pretty good going even for, I know surgery's got a lot better, but in those days it took you about a week to recover the anaesthetic before you could actually do it. So very, very large numbers of patients, taking a huge pressure off Roehampton, obviously. Not that I think they ever got much in the way of thanks for it, if I can put it that way. So back to Sir William. Perhaps the main originator of the whole idea, I'm pretty sure he was. Certainly the main driving force. He oversaw and directed almost all aspects of planning, personally provided most of the surgical care, led on the concept of incorporating training, and cut through most of the bureaucracy. He didn't tolerate, he didn't have an administrator. Why would you want one of those? He may have been a bit of a control freak, and I don't want to say he was a bit of a control freak, but he was the man for the time and moment. He did not need to faff around in this situation. He needed to get ahead and do it. I mean, the public meeting was in March, and the hospital opened in October of the same year, 6 months basically. Now, look how long did Queen Elizabeth take to build it? 7 years or something like that. you needed something like that wasn't going to, as I say, fad around. And Erskine is his longest lasting monument. His osteotomes are gone, his meningiomas are gone and things like that. Well, rickets, mercifully, it's not such an issue these days. But Erskine remains, albeit we'll see in a slightly different format now. And interestingly, it still needs £8 million a year to keep the good works going. That's the equivalent of what it got back in 1916-17. And that's still what it needs to maintain its current situation. So it's moved from being Erskine Hospital to being Erskine Home. The predominant diagnoses there are sadly neurodegenerative disease, Parkinson's, Alzheimer's and so on. I have to say, having visited people in it, it is lovely. The staff are lovely and the facilities and premises and so on are absolutely lovely. So it's bringing a very high standard of care, but a rather different kind of care. This is just a kind of garden area and a wee situate bit and so on and so forth. It's nearly all single rooms, I think. I think there's a few, like 3s and 4s and things like that, but the majority of the rooms are single rooms. John, Reid and Macewen are commemorated, if you like, in the Reid Macewen Centre. For a while this was a conference centre, and some of you, I don't know, NHS used to use it for things. I've done lectures and things like that in it. It's now what's called the Activities Centre, and it's got activities for people maybe with mild dementia and so on, to try and keep them active, keep their brain active, give them things to do, manual, keep their coordination good and so on and so forth. But it's commemorating William Macewen and John Reid, who purchased the place. The Vanishing Willows are still commemorated. This is the restaurant and cafe at the Garden Centre at Erskine Hospital, and it's known as the Vanishing Willows. I don't think Nick Nairn's involved. I took that picture a couple of years ago. I don't think Nick Nairn's still involved, sadly, but it's still called, I drove past it the other day, it is still called the Vanishing Willows. So the kind of, the apocryphal story, if it is apocryphal, or the true story, for all I know, lives on, shall we say, in that. Erskine Hospital turned into Mar Hall Hotel, and that's the Mar Hall Hotel as it currently is. That's the sort of opening of it. You park the car in there if you're going to a wedding or something like that. There's the entranceway. You can imagine going through there. There's a current dining room in Mar Hall. Looks very nice. Maybe a wedding reception or something like that. And there's the ceiling that you saw earlier on, which is still there and it looks absolutely identical. And the farmland that there was round Erskine was actually farmed by patients and so on. It's turned into a golf course. Now, rather sadly, I have to report that Mar Hall went into administration 6 weeks ago. The administrators are hopeful of selling it. It's still being kept open, it's still running, and they're hopeful of selling it as a going concern. It's the only 5-star hotel in Renfrewshire. But it's just a little bit of a shame now. When I've done this talk on several occasions before, I've not had to say that, but sad to say it's a fact that it was in the papers just at the end of August and so on. So I'm coming to the end, you'll be glad to learn. Just a couple of wee things here. Somewhere I did talk, they said, what's the long-term consequences of all this? Well, there's legacy in terms of rehabilitation, because you've got BSc in occupational therapy at Glasgow Cali, so the sort of seeds of occupational therapy which were started at Erskine have taken root there, I think. There's a legacy in terms of clinical prosthetics, because prosthetics and physiotherapy is obviously provided. The Westmark Centre at sort of general site, as I'll call it, Queen Elizabeth site, I suppose it is now, again is the sort of clinical prosthetics centre for the west of Scotland. Education, BSc in prosthetics and orthotics at Strathclyde University. So again, it's been taken on at a much higher level, obviously. And finally, research. This is actually from Edinburgh University. Machine learning and motor control group. You're actually trying to get artificial limbs that will respond to neurological input. It'll detect what you're trying to do and do it for you, if you like. Now, would any of that have happened without Macewen? Yes, of course it would, let's be frank about it. But did we probably get a head start in Scotland with some of the work that he did? I think probably the answer to that is yes. And in a way, that's also, I think, part of his legacy, which is nice to know. So I've got grateful thanks, because obviously I didn't pull this together all myself. From the Royal College in Glasgow, Carol Parry, Claire and Roy Miller, the former librarian. Bill McDowell and Leanne Russell are both from Erskine Hospital, were tremendously helpful. University of Glasgow, Sam Manager, and Jolanda McNeill from Mar Hall. And there's a book called Da Vinci Willows by John Calder in 1982, which provided some of the information. I'm going to finish with a slide which is of sort of personal significance. And Kate alluded to this earlier on. When I was a very junior doctor, in fact a medical student, I worked for this man, Hugh Conway. And Hugh Conway was a distinguished physician, Paisley, Royal Alexandra Infirmary in Paisley. He took part in the D-Day landings and things like that, so he did a lot of interest in the military, if you like. And he's the reason why I became a hospital doctor, because I just watched him taking a history from a patient and examining him with a teeny bit, and that was the diagnosis. Now, of course, it was always diagnosed because he said it was diagnosed and nobody was ever going to contradict him. But that said, he was right a huge amount of time. And I just thought, if I could do that, that would be good, wouldn't it? So I'm not going to tell you that was ever as good as Hugh was. But anyway, he was a major influence to me. When I worked in Paisley as a junior doctor registered, he was the visiting physician to Erskine Hospital. He would go out there once a week, and if they had any patients that were, had medical problems, if you like, he would then, advise on them and so on and so forth. And then latterly, he moved into retirement flats next to where my mother was living, and I used to go and see him there at times, just to catch up, chat and things like that and so on and so forth. And then he fell and fractured his femur and finished up being admitted to Erskine Hospital, Erskine Home, as it then was. And he was there extremely well looked after and loved it. And at no time did he have any evidence of neurodegeneration, I have to tell you, with his shadows a bloody attack the whole time. And remember things that I couldn't remember about, patients we'd seen in the past and things like that. But eventually he died at 2014. But so I think there's a distinct connection to that. And the reason I was asked to prepare this talk was because people at the college knew that I would know about Macewen from the Royal Family, and I would know about Erskine from Hugh. So that's what I've kind of brought together in the last hour or so. So thank you very much for your attention. If you have any questions or comments, happy to hear them.
That was wonderful. Thank you very much. That was absolutely fascinating. I don't want to take up too much more of your time. Does anybody have anything they'd like to ask Ken? Now's your chance. Be very modest about how much he knows about it. So I think, yeah.
Just I was reading earlier on that Hugh was also a police surgeon, and I was just wondering your thoughts on how much of that experience made him such a wide capability and how much that influenced.
I wasn't actually aware he was a police surgeon, but he may well have been, since as you saw, he dipped his finger in most things, if you like. I doubt if it would have all that much influence. I think he was, if you like, operating on a different level to the average police surgeon, most of which is pretty straightforward, to be honest about it. I mean, I've not done much of it myself, but I think he was already, after all, he became a consultant with the Royal Infirmary only 9 years after he graduated. Now, that's a pretty steep learning curve and so on. So I think he was already well up that learning curve in only 2 or 3 years, something like that. So I suspect police surgeons are a means to make some money, and that's fine. He was, because he obviously predates NHS, so his patients would be paying largely privately and so on. But I'll look into that. I wasn't aware of that.
So he did, I'll just have a wee second, he did a bit of, he worked a little bit with Glaister. So John Glaister was a police surgeon, so he was the tagger of the day, I guess. There was a sort of television series made about it. John Glaister was one. Yeah, but it was one series, I guess, so maybe it wasn't that popular. So whenever you read anything about Macewen being a police surgeon, it seems to be very much exactly as you said, that it was a kind of a means for an end. It was a bit boring, and he wasn't able to do as many things as he would like to, or as many things as he would like to do. So he became a surgeon, exactly as you said. But yeah, he did work as a police surgeon for a short period of time.
I could tell you a bit more as well, because he got publications out about too, Ken, and he was a police surgeon, went about sort of predating the Glasgow coma scale about alcoholic comas and things. It's really quite interesting. It's less known about though. He's got publications during a police surgeon.
I guess I was looking into him in a later stage of his life. I mean, he he was 67 when Erskine came up.
I think so. Actually, what I think is really fascinating about that is that what Macewen achieved, you know, in his twilight years is amazing. So everybody knows about the brain surgery, and lots of people have heard about the pneumonectomy for tuberculosis and the osteotomies for rickets, etc. But that's fascinating. I'm going to tell you just one thing actually, because you just reminded me more of when we were saying publication. So one of the things when I was looking at, I was doing some stuff on our social media account about William Macewen, and I was sort of trying to pick some facts that weren't going to spoil what Ken was going to tell us about. And so I discovered that Macewen's very first publication was a case report where he was describing Joseph Lister. Joseph Lister's work with transfusions, so Lister's also known for antisepsis, but he did some work with transfusions. So it was a case report that Macewen wrote describing Lister's work on transfusions. And the thing about that is interesting, and I think probably sums up the character of William Macewen, is that he was a junior surgeon and he was working for Lister's successor. So Lister's successor was his boss. Surgeons were highly revered at that time, and it would be quite bold for a trainee surgeon to then produce a case report about somebody else, so another boss who wasn't working there. Right. So that was pretty fascinating, and you can well imagine William Macewen from a sort of fairly young age in his surgeon career just deciding, this is interesting, this is what I'm going to do, I don't care who my boss is. So, yeah.
Yes, as I say, I think he probably wasn't somebody that I would have liked to work for. Because
he's a great man.
I think there would be no doubt that you were working for him rather than with him.
He said that to me.
But again, as I say, this was nice.
All the trivial stuff that you did, like ordering
overcoats and
all that sort of thing. I mean, is there any indication that you delegated to people, or?
There's not. The minute books are obviously done minutes of meetings. The minute books don't have any suggestion that he delegated, that he may have delegated some of it. It was referred to him to deal with. He may have dealt with it, I get somebody else to do it. But basically, you know, it was the route to getting anything done was Macewen, and then beyond that. And he had views on ventilation of wards and things like that, you know, that are recorded. And so I think he took quite an active part in it. As I say, I'm sure he did delegate some of it. But
I mean, what you're saying, I mean, there sounds like some narcissism there.
I think the concept of a good conceit of himself probably wasn't wrong. But on the other hand, if you've done the first neurosurgery in Scotland, you're entitled to be a wee bit big-headed.
Yeah, the fact that, as Kate said, he broke away from protocol and did things, you know, that's a brave person that would...
Imagine where we'd be if he hadn't. Look at all those things you'd never be allowed to do right now.
There's a good case for narcissists. Yeah, they do something.
The trouble nowadays is if you start going outside your area of specialism, you find you're getting struggle. Or you'll be called out for doing it, if you like. And the idea that any single surgeon would do that set of operations is just bonkers. But things were very different in those days, and to some extent, without being unkind, working in the Royal Infirmary in 1890 or whatever it was, you know, the patient population, even nowadays, they don't expect very much. In those days, they expected nothing at all, to be honest with you. And if was he going to get sued? No. Nobody ever thought about it. He would have done his best, and the idea of suing the surgeon that operated on him because it went wrong, that's just never going to happen, and so on. And things have moved on a bit. I'm not saying that's a good thing, but it was a fact that he could kind of practice on people here just a wee bit. And but I think he was a good surgeon. You know, I don't think there's much doubt that he knew one end of the scalpel from the other. Yeah, but as you say, maybe having a wee bit of a conceit of yourself is not a bad thing.
And stickler for cleanliness as well. So he firmly believed in Joseph Lister and was a real stickler for cleanliness.
Antiseptic, just cleanliness.
Yeah. Yes.
It was just to say, actually, the Willows, about the Willows, in the centenary of the First World War, between 2014, 2018, 19, Erskine Hospital actually gave 2 willows back. Oh, you didn't get it. Sorry, we're just share the rest of it. Yeah, so they donated 2 willows back to the university. And then they were already like in a bit of the university lab to kind of acknowledge the kind of story.
The story, exactly. So the guys being actually maybe 2 rows ahead for all that. But yes, folk from Erskine mentioned that to me, and it was a nice touch, if you like. And it got them what they wanted, which was a bit publicity.
Exactly, yes,
So it was a PR exercise rather than a tree planting exercise. But hey ho, I mean, if it raises a profile, then I'm all in favour of it.
Yeah, it's nice these connections.
Yes, exactly. And it's a good story.
Ken, you alluded that he was not a people person. You have told us that he didn't get on with his colleagues,
Yes.
which we knew. But he got such great accolade from many international societies. Why do you think that happened? Because we see traits there that are perhaps a little bit OCD, and there's a bit Aspergery and various other things that are there. And I just wonder what else was going on, because...
I'm not sure. I mean, obviously it must have been travelling a fair bit. I suspect if he went and would do a lecture, then people would remember the lecture, because it would be, quite groundbreaking stuff and so on. And I think that because of that, he just had the respect of the people that he met. And he was probably quite a forceful personality. He was somebody, I mean, you know as I do, the minute you see the word charismatic surgeon, your eyes go, oh God. Because charismatic nearly always means that, arrogant or very forceful or something like that. And the minute you see charismatic surgeon, your heart sinks. But I suspect he was, and charmed people, if he wanted to. I suspect he didn't see much point in charming his colleagues in either the Western or the family. But maybe if you've gone all the way to Vienna or something like that, it's quite nice to be charming, and you can maybe turn on the charm.
Well, don't you see that quite a lot of surgeons have psychopathic tendencies?
I'm not looking at that.
When I said psychopathic tendencies, not
Mr. Coon, would you like to comment?
I would say surgeons always make a decision. It's never in doubt, and occasionally is wrong.
It is a bit like economic. Once you've made your mind up, that's what I'm going to say. Doesn't matter what happens after that. Yeah, I mean, you do need a particular personality to be a surgeon, because you do actually have to have quite a bit of self-confidence. Because, I've been a rifle in something who's a bit of the height of my dexterity abilities and things like that. If you're going to open somebody's chest and take a lung out or something like that and put them back together again, you have to know what you're doing. And particularly when you were doing it in 1890 without modern anaesthesia and without critical care and things like that, you had to have a pretty good conceit of yourself to think you could get away with that. Now, what we don't know, of course, is the failures. There's no suggestion that people were dying right, left and centre at his hands or anything like that. In his normal operating days, I mean, the stump revision and so on and so forth was relatively straightforward. But you do need a fair bit of self-confidence, self-belief to do that. I could never have done it. And I knew that personality-wise unsuited to it. Chatting to people about their diabetes, fine, do that all day, but that doesn't require quite such self-belief, if I may put it that.
So physicians generally tend not to like to upset people too much, whereas surgeons just bulldoze through and do what they want.
You're reverting to type.
I'm slightly like stereotyping here. I try to avoid.
When McEwen was at the Western, so he wanted to operate, there wasn't space in an operating theatre, so he asked management, can we have space to operate? No, you can't. So what did McEwen do? We did what no physician would have done. We just sort of muttered and then done what management wanted. McEwen set up his own operating theatre in the waiting room and operated in the waiting room because he'd been told that you couldn't have space in an operating theatre, and he didn't. He felt that the patient required to be operated on there and then. So you do have to have, we're kind of joking, but you probably do have to have that type of personality to kind of get things done.
And then you've got lovely surgeons, neurosurgeons like Michael Bond.
Yeah, right. But you can't imagine Sir William Macewen being a diabetes physician, chatting to people about their diet and exercise patterns and so on. So he would never know that wasn't his style, if you like. But therefore, it was just that he didn't do that and did do what he did, because everybody wins out of that. And as I say, 5,500 people went through Erskine and got artificial limbs and things like that. And that's quite a feat given the time scale. It was all done extremely quickly and extremely successfully. There are no, I'm not aware of any kind of scandal stories, if I may put it that way, about the time at Erskine. I think, I'm sure not everybody, was 100%, but there was no suggestion that people were being poorly treated or anything.
Did he have time to get married? I mean, I can't remember.
Yes, he had a wife, yes.
Did he have children?
Yes, he had 2 kids, I think. Don't think either of them went into medicine in any way, shape or form, but
I wonder what kind of husband he was.
He loved animals, he loved animals. So he had a dog called Leo that used to take into Belvedere Hospital with him, and Leo had a wee inkwell in his collar.
Spunky as well.
Yeah, and spunky, and a wee inkwell in his collar, and Hugh used to dip his pen in to write in the notes from Leo's collar. So a man who likes dogs is a nice man.
Must be, all that stuff about being a control freak, all gone.
Anybody else have anything they'd like to ask him? We've worked you hard enough, so thank you very much. That was fantastic.
A little token of thanks for giving such a wonderful talk, and thank you so much for starting off this exhibition.
Pleasure.
It runs till the 8th of December, so tell all your friends to come, and the opening hours are on our website. So thanks for coming, everybody, and there's still some refreshments outside if you feel like something before they go home. Okay.
Thank you.